Would you mind if federal agents showed up at your doorstep and confiscated all of your ham radio gear? How about if they then fined you with tens of thousands of dollars in punishment, fines, and fees? Well, if you're okay with that, then don't bother to watch this video. But before you go, please give me a like and subscribe. The Code of Federal Regulations is massive, and it's growing larger every day. I'm not here to make a political statement about that, and I'm not a lawyer, nor am I an expert on the Code of Federal Regulations. So let me preface this by saying if you have found yourself running afoul of these codes, you need to consult with an attorney that specializes in these kinds of things. The Code of Federal Regulations is broken down into multiple parts. Of interest to us as hams is Part 97. This is the set of rules and regulations that are specific and govern the amateur radio service. Part 97.111 speaks of authorized transmissions, or what you can do on ham radio. This is where we'll start our focus. This section of Part 97 speaks first of two-way communications and contains 5 different times that hams can, while staying within the regulations, communicate on their ham radio. An amateur station may make transmissions necessary to exchange messages with other stations in the amateur service, except those in any country whose administration has notified the ITU, or the International Telecommunications Union, which is part of the UN, that it objects to such communications. The FCC will issue public notices of current arrangements for international communications. This first section talks about what we usually consider ham radio, talking to DX and local stations through a repeater during a contest. However, there is the caveat that if another country has said they don't want their hams to talk to the US hams, then we can't talk to them. The good news is that there are currently no banned countries. We can talk to anybody. There are countries that don't let their citizens use ham radio at all. And right now, that's only Yemen and North Korea. Now, you might think that communist countries would not allow amateur radio, but Russia, Cuba, and China all have active ham radio operators, and international contacts with ham radio are allowable in those countries. Secondly, an amateur may make transmissions necessary to meet essential communications needs and to facilitate relief actions. Now, this is for organizations like ARIES, the Red Cross, Salvation Army. There are a number of them out there. I've put out a video on these kind of emergency services, and we'll link it in the video description. Third, an amateur station may make transmissions necessary to exchange messages with a station in another FCC regulated service while providing emergency communications. This means that in case of an emergency, you can certainly use your ham radio privileges to communicate with CBeers in REACT or the police, fire, and other first responders. They are all using their privileges under their specific FCC part. Now, for information on the logistics of how all this would work, and I'll have to refer you to your club's emergency communication coordinator. Every jurisdiction is going to have different ways of handling and implementing these kind of communications. Fourth, an amateur station may make transmissions necessary to exchange messages with the United States government stations necessary to provide communication specifically for RACES. As noted in my previous video, RACES is the only federally recognized emergency service for hams. Again, to get involved with RACES or ARES or really any emergency kind of thing, contact your club or regional emergency communication coordinator. Fifth, an amateur station may make transmissions necessary to exchange messages with a station in a service not regulated by the FCC, but authorized by the FCC to communicate with the amateur stations. An amateur station may exchange messages with participants in the United States military stations during Armed Forces Day communications. Every year, coinciding with Armed Forces Day, there's a special event which is coordinated by the ARRL, where military stations will transmit on their frequencies and listen for responses on the amateur radio frequencies. Well, hams will be operating split, as are the military stations, and they will transmit on the amateur radio frequencies and listen on the military frequencies. There's a link in the video description for more information about this special operation. Now, we've talked about two-way communications. Let's talk about one-way communications. FCC Part 97.111 says an amateur station may transmit the following types of one-way communications and then gives you 7 types of one-way communications. The first, brief transmissions necessary to make adjustments to the station. For example, if you're tuning an antenna, even just pushing that tune button and letting your radio or external tuner do its magic. Just be sure to preface and conclude each transmission with the word test and include your call sign. You also want to be on the lowest power setting that you can be so as not to disturb others on the band. And in that same light, you should ensure that you'll be transmitting in the clear, not over someone already involved in a QSO. Second, you may transmit brief one-way communications necessary to establish two-way communications with other stations. For example, calling CQ or tossing your call sign out on a repeater. Third, you can send telecommand signals. Now, telecommand are signals that are used by satellite control operators or by the control operator of a local repeater, many times at least, to adjust the repeater's operations. Fourth, you may transmit one-way communications necessary to provide emergency communications. Now, the fifth and sixth types are transmission, and I've included these because they're closely related, are transmissions necessary to assisting persons learning or improving their proficiency with the International Morse Code, and transmissions necessary to disseminate the information bulletins. And this is something we'll discuss further under the Prohibited Communications, Part 97, subsection 113. Finally, seventh, you may make one-way transmissions of telemetry. Now, this was good news to me because if you, like I, are a fan of Whisper, this is your get-out-of-jail-free card. Now that you know what you can do with transmissions, what you can do, let's take a look at prohibited transmissions, or what you can't do. This is under FCC Part 97.113, and it starts off by stating that no amateur station shall transmit ... and then goes on to, well, a whole bunch of stuff. We'll cover it all. It starts out with the FCC Get You Into Jail card, stating that no amateur station shall transmit communications specifically prohibited elsewhere in this part. Now that sounds suspiciously like it was written by a lawyer. It goes on to state, no amateur station shall transmit communications for hire or for material compensation, indirectly or directly paid or promised, except as otherwise provided in these rules. So, what are the exceptions to getting paid to do ham radio? Well, let's take a look at them. The first exception is that a station licensee or station control operator, that's you. As a matter of fact, your ham radio license, if you went on the ULS site and printed it out, contains two sections. One is your station license, one is your operator license. So this is talking about you guys. You may participate on behalf of an employer in an emergency preparedness or disaster readiness test or drill. Now this is limited to duration and scope of each test or drill and operational testing immediately prior to such test or drill. Test or drills that are not government sponsored are limited to a total time of 1 hour per week, except that no more than twice in any calendar year they may be conducted for a period not to exceed 72 hours. Next, an amateur radio operator may notify other amateur operators of the availability for sale or trade of apparatus normally used in the amateur station, provided that such activity is not conducted on a regular basis. This means you can tell other hams that you have some old gear available for sale. You cannot finalize the sale over there, meaning giving out your bank information or credit card to complete the sale, which is probably a good idea anyways, something you wouldn't want to do in a public forum. Nor can you start up an over-the-air ham radio store. Moving on, a control operator may accept compensation as an incident of a teaching position during periods of time when the amateur station is used by that teacher as part of a classroom instruction at an educational institution. Now, as a by the way, STEM classes are a great time to introduce ham radio as a practical example. Now, previously I promised that we would discuss sending Morse code and practice bulletins over the air. And you can be paid for that. I'll caveat this with my opinion that this particular exception is meant for the ARRL, and it's a cutout for them, all right? But it could be exploited by another group if they so wished. The exception states, the control operator of a club station may accept compensation for the period of time when the station is transmitting telegraphy practice, that's Morse code, or information bulletins, provided that the station transmits such telegraphy practices and bulletins for at least 40 hours per week. If I could transmit CW for 40 hours a week, I'd be a lot faster than I am now. The operations need to be scheduled at least on at least six amateur service, mid-frequency and high frequency, that means the HF bands, using reasonable measures to maximize coverage, where the schedule of normal operations times and frequencies needs to be published 30 days in advance of the actual transmission, and where the control operator does not accept any direct or indirect compensation for any other services as a control operator. That means that the control operator at the ARRL works 40 hours a week, pumping out Morse code and bulletins, and that's his job. 40 hours a week. Good work if you can get it. I wonder if he's burnt out by the weekend and participates in contests. That completes the exceptions to accepting payment for being an amateur radio operator. So, we'll move on to other restrictions. No amateur station shall transmit music using phone, except as specifically provided elsewhere in this section. Another exception. Communications intended to facilitate a criminal act. That one was recently in the news. Messages encoded for the purpose of obscuring their meaning, except as otherwise provided herein. Obscene or indecent words or language. False or deceptive messages, signals, or identification. That's a lot of information stuffed into that one run-on paragraph. Again, probably written by an attorney. No amateur station shall transmit communications on a regular basis which could reasonably be furnished alternative through other radio services. This means that if communications could be made using the business bands, then they should be made using the business bands. There are for-profit organizations that want to lower their operating costs of doing business by using amateur operators and equipment. Instead of hiring or purchasing and paying for operators, licenses, and equipment with their business funds. For those of you thinking about starting up a pirate radio station, Part 97.113 states, an amateur station shall not engage in any form of broadcast, nor may an amateur station transmit one-way communications, except, another exception, as specifically provided in these rules. Nor shall any amateur station engage in any activity related to program production or news gathering for broadcasting purposes, except that communications directly related to the immediate safety of human life or protection of property may be provided by the amateur stations to broadcasters for dissemination to the public where no other means of communication is reasonably available before or at the time of the event. No amateur station shall retransmit programs or signals emanating from any type of radio station other than an amateur station, except propagation weather reports, information intended for use by the general public and originating from the United States government stations, and communications including music originating on United States government frequencies between manned spacecraft and the associated Earth stations. So if you're putting out some information on a conversation between the space station and down below and they had some music playing in the background, don't worry about it. You're covered. Prior approval for manned spacecraft communication retransmissions must be obtained from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, and such transmissions must be for the exclusive use of amateur radio operators. Propagation, weather forecasts, and manned spacecraft communications retransmissions may not be conducted on a regular basis, but only occasionally as an incident to normal amateur radio communications. Now, for more information on these limits, specifically the space stuff, I would recommend contacting the good folks at AMSAT. I'll put their link down below. Finally, no amateur station except an auxiliary, repeater, or space station may automatically retransmit the radio signals of other amateur stations. Well, that's it for Part 97, subsections 111 and 113. I hope you've learned something. I know I did while doing the research for this. I had to look up a lot of exceptions, a lot of legalese and stuff like that. The words that I've been putting up are directly out of the Part 97, so that you can trust. My interpretations, maybe not so much. So again, I remind you, I'm not a lawyer, nor am I an FCC Part 97 expert. That said, although Part 97 is fairly unambiguous in its wording, if you have any questions on it, don't depend on so-called social media experts, myself included. The ARRL does improve lawyers who are Part 97 experts who can answer your questions. Oh, thank you for dropping by my little shack in the corner for a ham shack chat. Please take a moment to give me a like by checking out the thumbs, or by clicking on the thumbs up button. Remember that likes are free. They truly only take a fraction of a second. And they're a nice way to show your appreciation for my efforts. They give me a warm fuzzy. I like warm fuzzies. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so please share this with friends, family, and anyone else who might appreciate the content. Also, please subscribe to this channel so you can see all of my content in one convenient spot. Don't forget to ring that bell so you'll be notified when new content is posted. As always, at your service, I'm Tom, ND3N. I'm out.